Hello everyone, my name is Mr. Boff and we have yet another homework video for you. This time it is Year 11, Week 6, Descriptive Writing, and it is the hot air balloon stimulus image that we are responding to. So, usual rules for descriptive writing apply. We are writing in third person, not first person. You've got the example there. We are writing in complete sentences, so every sentence needs a subject and a verb, unless it's very clear we're intentionally including a fragment, and that is in fact involved in some of our sentence scaffolds. And then also another kind of ongoing objective and really a golden rule we need to be following is that we need to maintain consistently throughout our writing the past tense. Okay, just some quick reminders. This is building on the last video where I spoke a little bit more at length about maintaining the past tense. It was definitely better this time around in the most recent homework. You just got to ask yourself, when's this happening? Pay attention to every verb. Make sure that you anchor each paragraph with a clear past tense verb early. So, for example, the lights flickered. And remember, even when we are using a flashback, that still has to be in the past tense. And then we move into effectively not the distant past of the flashback, but kind of the now. We're still writing in the past tense. Flashbacks are the past within the past. Really, I can't stress enough how important it is to actually just read your work out loud, whether it's to yourself, whether it's to a family member, whether it's to your cat or dog. Okay, by reading it out loud, we can pick up on some of these accidental shifts in a way that they aren't as immediately apparent if we are reading it silently in our heads. Our brains do a kind of funny thing where we almost auto-correct or we skip over our errors, whereas when we read them out loud, we distance ourselves from what we've written and it becomes a lot easier to notice and, in fact, hear those mistakes. Okay, so that's the actual image on the right-hand side that is in your exam preparation booklet. So I'm going to go through on the next slide how we go from looking at the picture to coming up with an interesting idea. Obviously, the associations that we need to be making within the image, how we can sequence our ideas into a coherent structure and plan, and also what sort of tone we might want to adopt in our writing. So, I will have to apologise at this particular juncture just because I'm not feeling 100%. So if there's a little bit of coughing shortly, I do apologise. Okay, so what can we see? Well, we can see hot air balloons rising through this kind of almost painted dawn sky, what looks to be a dawn sky. We can see in the sky itself layers of kind of pink and gold light, and we can see how that's washing across the valley we have before us. We can see again in the distance some really ancient rock formations, what look like ancient rock formations that have clearly been shaped by wind and time and those sort of really kind of extended geological processes. We can see stone houses and rooftops, and we can see how they're stacked rather unevenly across the hillside. We can see a terrace before us, in front of us, where the photograph is taken from. We can see rugs and pots and lanterns, that indication of human presence. And then we can see more generally that vast sense of distance, the vastness of the landscape stretching out to the mountains beyond. Now we move, so that's literally what we can see. Okay, I'm just describing what I can see in the image. Then we move to the associate step, okay, where we're thinking about obviously not just what we can see and what we can feel, but actually our own feelings in relation to the image and what we would associate with the image. So the scene is interesting because it has a kind of duality to it. We've got, on the one hand, continuity, the landscape, that sense of what you might call geological time. But then we also get change. We've got human structures, which are far more changeable than natural ones, generally speaking. Okay, even the flight of a balloon can be associated with sort of impermanence and transience. It's not going to be a very long flight, is it? It's going to be short duration. That change in perspective is not going to last very long. So the balloons then become symbols of perspective, of memory. Certainly the idea that we would associate balloons with, people making memories of a hot air balloon ride. And maybe almost like the human wish to rise above time itself, to kind of move beyond the present. And then the rock, the sand, the landscape, that really recalls what we sometimes call geological time or deep history. That's the idea of the earth as this like truly ancient, over hundreds of thousands, over millions of years. The earth is this kind of ancient witness. And then the balloons, the sense of height, looking at things from a different point of view, gives us a different perspective, not just of the land and the landscape, but also the passage of time. And I suppose it changes the way that we might perceive kind of human settlements as well. We can kind of see their development. Okay, so it's an image that for me I would associate with awe and wonder, um, humility, particularly when you are seeing the kind of vastness of the landscape. Has echoes of the sublime, like the experience that Wordsworth relays in that famous excerpt from the Prelude that you will have studied in year 10, and therefore more broadly that recognition of when we have these sublime experiences, thinking about just the deep history, the length of time, and then obviously then it gets us to think about human impermanence, transience, the brevity or shortness of human existence. Okay, some pretty deep ideas there, but why not? Okay, now I want to use, and I'm really interested in the way that we can use the structure of our description to actually kind of move across time itself, and that ascent descent movement of the balloon. We can kind of link that to the passage of huge amounts of time. So here's what I'm going to go with. This is what I thought about. So the narrator, or at least the main character we're focusing on. Obviously, we're writing this in third person, but the narrator is kind of like observing someone in a balloon. They rise in the balloon, and the kind of world spreads out below. Then we get a sort of flashback, but where it's a real serious flashback. We're going right back into kind of deep history, pre-civilization, pre-human landscape, where we've got rock, we've got wind, and that kind of silence. Although the more I thought about that, as I was putting this together, the more I thought about it would be quite good to have a sense of kind of nature in the absence of humans, obviously thriving before we turn up and ruin everything. Then the development of civilizations, the transformation of the land, the way that human beings kind of shape the land to our purposes as a species, the rise of cities, the rise of civilizations, and obviously the inevitable, almost cyclical kind of rise and fall of civilizations over centuries. And then we go back to the present, although we're still writing about it in the past tense, and that idea of like modern lights flickering, the movement of people below, and that broader reflection on the idea that although we are at this particular moment in time, we recognize that all things human must pass, and therefore even things as they are now, the city as it is now in the photograph, that too will fade and decay. Right, tone. Now I put numinous as in, so by that, the use of that particular word, I'm thinking about almost a kind of sense of sacred, divine kind of wonder, that sense of the sublime that we can feel when we think about time, deep history like geological time, the formation of mountains, and so on, and contrast that with our own impermanence as human beings. So it's also going to necessarily be reflective, that sense of awe, but also maybe some melancholy there, as in a reflection, a rumination on what has been lost, the loss of civilizations and so on. And in a sense, too, it's necessarily going to be philosophical, detached, observing the passage of time, observing the rise and fall of cities and civilizations, and therefore the narrator becomes this kind of witness of time and of history itself. So here is my plan, and I'm going to get my head, as ever, out of the way. So, starting with the ascent, the balloon rising over the valley, rooftop shrinking, the horizon kind of broadening out. Flashback, pre-human landscape, world of rock and wind and so on, although I think I'm going to add, for interest and some sensory description, sound of some animals and so on. Then humanity and the development of kind of rise and fall of cities and civilizations. And then we go back to the modern city and that reflection on human transience. So that is my 4-paragraph plan. Okay. And that is a really manageable plan within the restrictions and limitations of the exam. Okay, the writing cycle. We follow the same descriptive cycle that is from AQA themselves. And what's really good about this descriptive cycle is that because we have the reflect and react elements to it, that we're not just constantly describing the world out there, but there's this kind of internal psychological, and it invites almost a philosophical reflection on human existence, our relationship with nature, time, memory, civilizations rising and falling, and so on. So we can we can do both kind of external physical description of the landscape and so on, and the balloon going into the air and all that. But then we can also have that kind of, if we want to be slightly fancy about it, that description of the psychological landscape and the way that we think about our relationship with time and nature and the landscape. Okay, so I'm going to go through now the sentence scaffolds. This is where, as you work your way through, you would need to obviously like pause the video. So the ascent, okay, this is the idea of we've got to get the balloon like up in the air, the shift in perspective, the shift in view, and that growing awareness of the vastness of the landscape. The react, obviously, there's that touch of fear, that note of fear. Don't forget that the feeling of the sublime is a feeling of awe and wonder, but mixed with fear, and maybe even sometimes, depending on the situation, terror. It's a very intense mixture of feelings, complicated mixture of feelings, and so that hand gripping tightly to the basket, the bottom part that you kind of stand in of the hot air balloon, obviously showing that sense of it. This is kind of anxiety inducing. Never mind just the fact that he's up high. Right, then we go flashback, pre-human landscape. These are pretty self-explanatory, all about the passage of time. You'll see for the describe sentence scaffolds, I've done it for the previous one as well. Remember, just because it says describe doesn't mean we just write one describe sentence. We want different forms of sensory description. We can have multiple sentences within these kind of headings or sections. So don't think, oh, one inform, one describe, one reflect, one react, one connect sentence. You can add to these as well. These sentence scaffolds aren't exhaustive. You can add to them. Okay, they are there to be adapted and used to help you. Okay, then we go humanity and the development of civilization. Let's get my large head out of the way. Okay, everything should be fairly straightforward here. Hands tough and calloused. So callous means like they built up kind of hard skin from hard physical labor. Okay, not the soft hands of someone that analyzes poetry all day. So we're thinking about how human beings, through physical labor, through our hands, build and construct new worlds. Okay. But then in the third sentence, but every century folded into the next, each monolith collapsing. That is like the rise and fall of civilizations. Has a touch of Ozymandias about it, that sentence scaffold. Beneath the earth endured, patient. Okay, again, fragment sentence, but controlled, doing it on purpose. Understanding, what is the earth understanding? Understanding that perhaps, something about human transience. And then we're back to the modern city, and I thought it would be good to have the sort of protagonist, the main sort of central character, the him or he of the story. The burner above him hissed, his mind pulled. So it's still third person, but the noise kind of like pulling him back into this sort of awareness of the moment he's actually existing in. And then we've got a word at the end there. Make sure we spell it correctly, because that's almost certainly a word that you've not come across before. We've got that word vicissitudes. Okay. Now, the vicissitudes of life, and it's often, well, in fact, it's almost always used in that particular combination or collocation of words. So vicissitudes of life, it means something like that. Originally, the word vicissitudes, I think it comes from Latin, just meaning like changes, but it's generally negative. A better way of thinking about it would not just be changes, but we'll be thinking about vicissitudes of life as the trials, the challenges, the difficulties, the tribulations we all experience. the kind of the ups and downs of life, but with an emphasis on life having its fair share, every life having its fair share of downs, as in difficult, challenging moments that we must kind of get through, survive, endure. And so, beneath a darkening, bruised sky, the tangled vicissitudes of life seemed, I think that um, they would seem rather unimportant. Okay, that actually, when you measure life by, the kind of say the 80 years of an average human life, if we say 80 is the average age, okay, or 70 years, when you then think, well, how does geological time work? The passage of time, we're talking tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of years. 70 or 80 years is nothing. And so all of our obsession with the challenges and difficulties of our lives, when then stretched out, when we reflect more broadly about the deep history of the earth, they can seem rather unimportant. They can seem trivial, unimportant, quotidian, kind of like tediously every day, whatever you want to say there. So it is that reflection on the impermanence and transience of human existence, almost like a combination of the key ideas in something like Ozymandias mixed with something like the Prelude is what I think I was getting at. Okay, so that's the final set. Apologies for the coughing. Okay, and then final checklist. So have you written in third person? Are all your sentences complete? Have you used sentence scaffolds? Have you consistently written in the past tense? Have you used the writing cycle in every single paragraph? And does each paragraph end with a connect sentence? If you've used a sentence scaffolds, you know that for the final one, and pretty much for all of these, then you should be absolutely spot on. You'll be fine. So I hope that was a useful video. A little bit shorter this week, but I just wanted you to kind of get straight into the writing. Any questions, any difficulties, let me know. I'll try my best to help you. And obviously, you can also contact your English teacher too. All right. So good luck. Happy writing. Enjoy this one. It's a great image, really kind of evocative, but we tried to do something a little bit more ambitious and a bit more philosophical this time around. All right. Thank you for watching.